Hello, I'm Naette Lee, and I'm joined by Dr. Richard Robertson, winner of the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Award for Excellence in Science for 2014. Dr. Robertson, congratulations on your award. How did you wind up working in the field that you work in, volcanology and geology?
Well, I'll give you a short version of the story, but it started perhaps in 1979, although I was always sort of generally interested in the outdoors, which is what geologists does. But in 1979, the Soufrière volcano had an eruption on the 13th of April, 1979. And I lived in the southern part of the country. The volcano is in the northern part of the country, northern third of the country. And you woke up, it was a public holiday, it was Good Friday, April 13th, not a very good day, you know.
Omens.
But you woke up in the morning, in fact, you were awakened by the sound of an exploding volcano. No, none of us had experienced that before, but you heard that sound of a roaring, like a roaring cannon. When you went outside in the yard, you looked up towards the north, and you saw this billowing cloud that expanded upwards. It looked like it was alive. And that itself was impressive. If you've never experienced the live eruption of a volcano, it's impressive as it is. Now, the next thing that happened, because of the fact that we had relatives, I had a grandmother that lived close to the volcano, within, I think, 3 or 4 kilometers of the volcano. My father decided to go towards Rose Hall, where she lived, to evacuate her, and I decided to go in the vehicle with him. I jumped in the vehicle because I was, by then, very excited about what was happening. So, first of all, the impression of this natural phenomenon that was very impressive. And then, as you moved towards the volcano, you saw the whole island was on the move. It was, I think it's my only experience of actually seeing, you know, virtually like refugees and evacuees, people moving. The whole country was on the move. You saw people on a donkey, you saw people with bundles, people walking, people packed into vehicles. As you moved towards the volcano, there was a lot more people that you saw. When you got to Rose Hall, you were right next to this explosion. I think from then, I got interested. And then subsequently, you heard there was a lot of scientists that came in, we call them ologists locally, that came in to tell us about what was happening with the volcano. And I realized quite quickly that we didn't actually have anybody on the island that knew anything about this phenomena. And I kind of, by myself, took it upon myself that, yes, I was interested and that we really should have somebody. So I set myself on a path which would lead up to now, which now I am a geologist. I work in the field and have been working for quite some time. And now I would perhaps be one of those persons who would now get into islands when the volcanoes erupt.
In the course of your research, is there anything remarkable about the region geologically that, you know, people should know more about?
Well, I think perhaps people don't realize the extent to which the region and the Earth itself is alive in a sense. We live in what we geologists call a tectonically active environment. We live in a region where, because of our location, because of the tectonics and the geological setting, we can have earthquakes, large magnitude earthquakes that could cause damage. We can have volcanoes, volcanic eruptions. In the Eastern Caribbean, we have at least one volcano that we think can erupt on each of the islands. In some of them, like in Dominica, you have more than one. And two of the primary sources for generation of tsunamis are large magnitude earthquakes and volcanic explosions. So we can have tsunamis. So the region, there are other parts of the world that are similar to that. But we are, in a sense, remarkable because of the fact that we have all these geologic hazards, and then you have to add on to that all of the other kind of hazards that we have. So we live in a multi-hazard environment, and therefore people who live here have to bear in mind that, yes, it's a fantastic, lovely place to live. We love it. It's great weather, great place to live, nice people. But we also have these natural hazards that from time to time could impact on us seriously, and therefore we need to be in a state of preparedness and we have to apply the knowledge that we have to make sure that when they hit, we're not going to be hit back completely.
How do communities in the Caribbean respond to the public education with respect to natural disasters? How do you, are they generally responsive? Do they take it seriously? And what is the best approach you have found in your experience to getting people to believe that a volcano erupting is entirely possible?
Yeah. Well, I think generally people in the region would like to get more information, would like to have more information. And one of the things that we do at the Seismic Research Center, which I work at, we have a strong push towards providing scientific material in a format that people could utilize, could understand. our focus is on younger people. So we have a range of things that we do, but we think that really what we need to do in the region is actually change the total mindset of our people. We tend to, I guess you must realize that in the region, we tend to think that in Trinidad, God is a Trini. In St. Vincent, God is a Vinci. So we tend to think that these hazards that I'm involved in monitoring and research, and we tend to think that they don't hit us. So therefore, one of the challenges of public education is actually to make people realize that these things can happen, and that there are actually things that you can do to make sure that if and when they happen, you don't really get totally cut off. So I think people respond quite well. I think for you to really reach out to people, you have to use a range of formats, a range of media. So we have things that utilize, regular talks, public education, talks to people. We have interactive things that we do. We put things on the internet. We use social media. We try to get things on radio. We do lots of interviews. So you have to use a range of formats to get to a range of publics, in a sense, because they have a range of people. Our focus is on younger people, but still you can't totally discount the older folks, although we think that it's more challenging to change their mindset. So I think people respond quite well, and I think there's a lot more that they would like to have, a lot more information. You just have to put it out there in various formats that they could utilize.
Your biography as a laureate talks about the research that you've done, and you have done a significant amount of research in the Caribbean. Do you think that research in your field is very popular? And if not, why not?
Well, I think it's quite popular, but not necessarily for people in the region. Okay. I think a lot of the research that is done in natural hazards in the Caribbean is perhaps done by people outside the region. A lot of people who are involved in research in volcanology, geology, seismology are people from outside. I don't think it's perhaps something that's unique to this field so much so, but it has to do with the fact that in terms of our investment in research in the region, generally as a Caribbean society don't invest a lot in research, scientific research. I don't think they invest sufficiently in scientific research. That perhaps has to do with the fact that we have limited resources, and there are other things that cut in, they have options for these resources that compete against scientific research. In particular, in our field, in my field, where I deal with earthquakes, volcanoes, and tsunamis, it's even more challenging because of the fact that these things don't happen very often. Geologists speak in time scales of millions of years, thousands of years. People's lifetimes are much shorter than that. And one of the challenges that we have, of course, is that we have a political cycle that is 5 years. So in terms of how the policymakers operate is even shorter. So the challenge is really getting people to think in the time scales that make them realize that even though something haven't happened in 200 years, that it can happen. And in fact, the fact that it probably has a return period of about 200 years, and it hasn't happened in 200 years or more, means that the chances of it happening is even more. So that's always a challenge, and I think that impacts on the funding that goes to research. I think there's more that needs to be done. I think researchers who are involved in our field, and we try to do it, and in other fields, they need to make a greater effort to ensure that the results of their research is available, is going to be used to influence policy, because that's the way in which things would move forward. Yeah, without that, it doesn't
That's
move.
What I was going to ask, because as a developing region, of course, development policy should be influenced by the environment
Science.
that we live in, and scientists understand that environment. Yep. Do you think that the policy takes the science, that is the research that you do, into consideration in the region generally? Do you think that governments sort of respect that scientists understand what is going on?
Well, I don't think it's sufficient. One can say there's always more that can be done, but I think it's a challenge, but it's a challenge in the region particularly, but it's a challenge globally. There's an greater effort, I think, amongst the scientific community to try to get their findings and their results to influence policy. It's always a challenge, and in the region it's particularly so because a lot of the fields that I am operating in, natural hazards, geology, those are fields that perhaps are not as, not as sexy as things like medicine and law, which influences things a lot more. But these are things that have to do with the earth, and the earth is a dynamic system. And if we don't get those things into policy, it makes a big difference. I think one of the key things, one of the things that scientists who are involved in research in the region has to do more of is that they need to prepare and make a greater effort, I think, and we all do, and we all try in our way, to make a greater effort to ensure that their scientific findings is made available to planners, to policymakers, to governments. I think what we have to do is actually not just make it available, but we have to try to work more actively with the people who chart the path for society to ensure that scientific understanding of the systems that we have actually is factored into the development planning. There's a lot that needs to be done in that regard, and perhaps, they highlight that an award to someone who's involved in geology and earth sciences, in natural hazards. Maybe the highlight that gives to that person is it allows me to perhaps influence that a bit more and speak more about the need for that to happen.
Do you think that it also has the potential to influence people who are selecting which way to take their careers in geology or volcanology or earth science? Do you think that it will have an impact on how many people actually focus on research as opposed to, going into minerals or energy? Do you think it will have that impact?
Well, I've certainly seen that one of the things that people that certainly when we go out in the field and when we go out in the islands, we speak to and as I said, our focus is on younger people. When we speak to kids in primary school and secondary school at all levels, I know that the fact that a Caribbean person is speaking to them makes a big difference. I've seen that, I've heard of people who have come back who are doing geology now who will tell me that, they got interested in geology because some couple of years ago I gave that talk, or somebody from Seismic gave a talk. So yes, I think it does. It makes a difference, and which is why things like the Caribbean Award for Excellence is really a very good idea, a good thing. That I think in the region we look too often to outside for exemplars of the things that we do. We look to outside for seeing what we would want to be, while we should look inside, and we need to make sure that younger people coming up could see that. So yes, I think certainly the focus that the award brings to geology, to volcanology, would be one that would help to influence persons who are thinking of career paths. That yes, you could go into research, you could go into monitoring of hazards, you could go into exploration. There are lots of applications for geology that is beyond just simply what I am doing or what you're doing in petroleum industry or the oil industry or the energy industry. There are need for geologists in engineering companies. There are need for geologists in works divisions. There are lots of problems we have in the islands of landslides that could do a geological input. There's a lot of need for them. There's not the jobs being created for them. I think that needs to be created. But certainly there's enough, there's a lot that is undiscovered still, unknown still about the world. And if there's a young person that's coming up that's interested in this field, there's a lot that they could explore. There's a lot of options for them.
You understand the geology of the region. Are we due for any major, how probable is it that we are due for a major geological hazard?
Well, I probably wouldn't be able to give you a figure. What I could speak about is the patterns that we have seen. Certainly, the indications are that if you notice, you just live in Trinidad, you must have noticed that the ground seemed to be shaking a lot more than it had in the past. That has to do with simply, we're not quite sure exactly why you seem to have a lot more earthquakes that are closer to the landmass of Trinidad and Tobago. It may be that the earth operates in certain cycles and we're just in a period where you have more earthquakes. It has to do with also the fact that people are a lot more aware of them. It has to do with the fact that they are coming closer to the landmass. A lot of the earthquakes that we have happen offshore. We have had within the last 100 years eruptions of Soufriere Hills volcano in Montserrat. We have had eruptions in St. Vincent, La Soufriere volcano. So we have had within the last 100 years certainly indications that we live in a tectonically active region. We have said before, I think my colleagues and I have said that in terms of large magnitude earthquakes, an earthquake that could be potentially damaging to Trinidad and Tobago, the last time one of those kinds of things happened is over 200 years ago. And given the history of these kinds of events, is about that time period that they tend to happen in. So in terms of the question of probability, that's why we came up with the idea that you're probably overdue for one. But quite apart from the repeat pattern, there are a number of other findings in terms of, we now know that the Central Range Fault in Trinidad, for example, is an area that may be compensating movement between large plates in the Caribbean. There are a number of other indications, other research that's going on in the region that indicate that, we can have, certainly within the foreseeable future, a large magnitude earthquake. But so therefore, we can't probably give you a probability figure, but clearly there's indications that we live in a region that these kinds of events can happen. Then they can happen. We don't know exactly how close in the future they can happen. But it's sufficiently of concern that we really need to move from sticking our heads in the sand and thinking that, God is a Trini, or wherever island you are in, to moving towards trying to put things in place, applying the knowledge that we have, the scientific knowledge, to make sure that we have proper building codes, enforcement of proper construction, we have proper planning guidelines in terms of how people construct. Because one of the things that people don't realize and people are not conscious of is that the thing that kills people from earthquakes and from these hazards, from volcanoes, you have to move away from them. So the thing that kills you is the hazard. So you move away and you should be fairly safe. In the case of earthquakes, the thing that kills you is the building. It's not the ground shaking. It's the building, poorly constructed building that kills you. So if you want to make sure that you are more resilient, it means that construction is a big factor in it. And that is something that you can do something about. It takes a little while to get to the stage where you're totally resilient, but we have to start somewhere, and we need to start now.
Well, Dr. Robertson, thank you so much for your insight into that, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Richard Robertson, winner of the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Award for Science 2014.